running our webinar today. This is the August Crisis Coach webinar, part of the 2017 series that we do with RenWeb for their member schools and other schools in the market. So thank you for joining us today, and many of you are working on back to school already and handling those types of events. And the topic today is probably a nightmare concern for parents and for administrators in public and private colleges and universities, as well as K-2 through 12. And it's, are you really prepared for an active shooter? And we're going to provide you some new insights today from some of the things that we've done in the past, and I believe you'll find it enjoyable. And introduce you to a new person today, too, in that process. If you have not before, you might want to consider joining us on social media. At Twitter, we're at Firestorm Soul. On Facebook, we're Firestorm Solutions. And there is a hashtag for this session, hashtag Crisis Code. Firestorm transforms crisis into value. We empower you to manage crisis and risk. Our expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Firestorm is America's crisis coach, and again, that focus on crisis and risk, and that'll be a constant theme as you sit in future webinars and exercises with us. And we follow a Predict, Plan, Perform methodology. Now, we have attorneys like everybody else, and they say you got to do a disclaimer, so here's ours. The presentation is not complete without the oral commentary and discussion, and any work product provided by Firestorm must be read in conjunction with the guidance given by your local, regional, or national authorities and regulators, as well as your organization or school's personal counsel. Moreover, the information and comments that we're providing today should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. Now, RenWeb, in our contact couldn't be on for today, and for those of you who are RenWeb clients, you know that their software is used to run your school and to handle all the aspects about it, and in many of the areas there are features on the RenWeb platform that will be helpful to you in a crisis or an emergency, even, for example, the parental repository that can be used. Joining us and just logging on now, I see him coming out on the website, is Jason Russell. Now, Jason is the founder and president and CEO, if he gets any more titles, I don't know how we'll deal with Jason, of Secure Ed. And Jason's career and background is in the Secret Service. That background is extremely important when it comes to topics that we're looking at today, active shooter, when it comes to the whole concept around how do we plan for that, how do we train for those areas. I was in meetings with Jason this weekend again, and we have teamed on multiple projects through the years, and I think you're in for a real treat because his insights will be extremely helpful in what we are doing in each of those areas. So, Jason, if you're on,
Jim,
jump in.
Sorry, Jim.
Hey, you're here.
Yes, sir.
We're glad to have you, and I showed your picture. And any comments you want to say as we get started into this? Your timing is absolutely perfect. By the way, Jason has been out doing training with an organization this morning and just finishing that up and stepped out of the room and working with them to be on the call with us today. So, Jason, thank you for making that. What would you like to say to everyone that's already on?
Well, absolutely. First of all, I want to thank everybody for jumping on today and what hopefully will provide some pretty valuable information. And that's exactly right. I just finished up an actual active shooter training in Las Vegas. So we just finished our scenario, and I ran in the room here to begin this, and hopefully I heard Jim talking a little bit about my background. Our company has been really developing processes to help organizations not only prepare standpoint, but also policy and procedure. And then also excited to be on today and looking forward to any questions and providing some good information.
And for those of you who are attending today, you're going to hear a conversation between Jason and I on this subject, and let's just jump ahead. By the way, my name is Jim Satterfield. I'm the CEO and President of Firestorm, and we're glad that you're joining us once again. And again, welcome back to school for those of you who have just started or are about to start the school year. The quote that you see on the screen, I wish they would have just listened to my concerns, comes from a shooting that happened in a small business in Orlando in June, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But that concept there is the big concern for everyone. And so we're going to be focused today on workplace violence prevention and response and the programs that you need to have in place. And I think you're going to have some insights that maybe you haven't had before. And as we're talking about it, our discussion today is going to be framed around before, what you need to do before the event happens, during, what actions do you need to take then, and then afterwards, how do we deal with the aftermath of these types of events? And where do you start as you think about those things? And when we think about physical security, the key elements to us are access. How do the bad guys get in? And what controls do you have in place? Could be fencing, locked doors, those types of areas to be able to control that access area. Awareness that there's been a breach, lights, cameras, alarm systems, and then actions. What do you physically need to do when that's occurred? And we talked about the behaviors of concern. Many times we can see evidence that someone's on a path to violence, and you can have an intercession before it escalates to that level. Site assessment, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, about a physical security site assessment, and that can be helpful to you to do a retrofit into your existing organization, or if you're building new structures, how can the security be engineered into that construction area? The emergency plans, which go beyond just active shooter, the training, and one of the things you're going to hear, I've asked Jason to share some of the things they're doing from a training perspective that I don't think you're going to see anywhere else, and I believe it will be a big advantage to you. And then the active shooter response, and there's a slight difference in what you'll hear today over what you're hearing elsewhere, and then the crisis management and insurance. And I would like to point out there's now insurance available to you around deadly weapons and active shooter that weren't available before in the marketplace. So when we think about those things, this is the business that was in Orlando in June. It's 34 people working in that company, and they do the retrofit on recreational vehicles and putting in the awnings and the other add-ons that could be added into that area. Small, family-owned business, not the type that we think of when we think about violence. And I think as it brings it ahead, as you can see, if suddenly if your business is on television and you can see the detail where it would be, or there's some picture from a helicopter flying over, this is probably not going to be a good day at your school or organization. This gentleman had worked in that company and was let go in 2014. There had been a ruckus between himself and another person, and in that situation there had been some violence there, and he said that it's a person that you needed to be careful of. Now in June, this is a picture that was shot from a helicopter going over, and you can see the police presence. If this was your school, imagine what would be going through the minds of the parents as they're seeing the school on television and the police walking around. Again, back to the gentleman that was there, he'd had an altercation with the person that later became the shooter. But this is back in 2014, and the shootings occurred in 2017. So they had 3 years of working with the person who committed the violence, but yet it was missed. And at his let go, when he was let go, he warned them specifically that this person would be a problem. Now, there have been threats, and clearly it's easier to see a threat than just a behavior. But look at the quote again. I did it in bold and underlined. I wish they would have just listened to my concerns. And if they have, the events that occurred in June might not have occurred. And so that's one of the things that we talk about a great deal. are looking to see how these could be prevented. But if it starts to occur, what do you need to have had in place from a physical security standpoint? What kind of plans and training do you need? The type of picture that you see here, the type of tent that's raised, and the removal of a person from the site gives you an idea of what it's about. Now, these are the individuals that were killed in June at that property. Imagine 30-something employees, 4 people killed, over 10% of their workforce. And I think many times in these types of events, the face of the person gets lost, and we never want to do that. So they put up on their website this note. I showed you the website at the very beginning. I hope that no school ever has to deal with those areas. So as we're thinking about them, there's some barriers to preparedness. And so, Jason, I see an alarm there. What are the barriers to preparedness?
I think I always like to compare everything we do in terms of preparedness for every other emergency versus what we do for fire. If you think about all the different things, as you look around the room you're sitting in right now, I would venture a guess that most of you are in a room that has some type of fire emergency preparedness mechanism in it, whether it's a pull station, a fire extinguisher, maybe a sprinkler, and really we take a lot of time to prepare for this one emergency. And really what it boils down to when you talk about preparing for an emergency is belief. People will not prepare for an emergency that they believe won't happen to them. So, and the reason we prepare so well for fire many times is because we're forced to. If you think about fire codes and the things that are put in place to ensure our buildings are prepared, it's only because we actually have a fire inspector who goes through our facility and says, you must do this, you must put this, sprinkler system in, or you must put this hood above your stove to make sure that if something that catches on fire can be put out. For the most part, if we weren't forced to do that, we probably wouldn't take all the steps to prepare for that situation, and a lot of that comes down to belief. Now, we believe emergencies can happen. We just don't believe they'll happen to us. So what we really try to do, and I think belief is far different than paranoia, where we don't want to be paranoid. We just want to have a general level of understanding that, look, is an active shooter unlikely? Extremely. Is it possible? Yes. So that's why I think it's important to really think about what can we do, what are some small things we can do to prepare for this incident, and then we just move on with our lives and continue to, run our organization without that paranoia, because really preparation provides a lot of peace of mind.
Before we move on and talk about other barriers to preparedness, I was in a conversation with Mark. Mark works with Jason, and they have built the organization together. And Mark shared a statistic around the number of children that have died, how long it's been since a child has died in a school fire. And Jason, is that a statistic you can give? I think I remember it from him. But yeah, to me, that's great.
Yeah, there really hasn't been. I'm sorry. Yeah, just based on what we've done for fire, and you think about, every person sitting in your room, if I said the sentence stop, drop, you all know to say roll, because you've been trained on that since you're a little kid. And we take such great measures to prepare for fire that there hasn't been a child killed from a fire in a school in around 65 years, which is fantastic. And what that means is we've actually accomplished what we tried to accomplish with fire. We haven't eliminated it, but we've taken enough relevant steps to really reduce the risk associated with it.
I think that's a powerful statistic, and unfortunately, we can't say it's been 65 years since a child has been killed in a school or hurt in a school. And with the 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually in America and the 2 million episodes of bullying annually in America, you can see why this is a significant material threat. And the success of the type of preparedness in the fire area is remarkable. My prayer would be that we would be at a point where we could say we went a school year without a death from violence in a school. But so far, we haven't been able to do that. So there are other barriers Do you want to talk a little bit more about those other barriers? You mentioned belief briefly, but anything else that you want to say about this particular
Yeah,
slide?
I think, sure. As we look at what we do for security in general, there's always barriers to security. There's always barriers to what features we can put in place. And obviously what you see on the screen here are what we consider to be kind of four of the main ones. We talked about belief, and that really is the largest. The first is cost. You think about what it costs to have a training session for your staff. What does it cost to, control our access? What does it cost to monitor our camera systems? And we start to make these calculations. Is the cost worth, what it provides for us? So that's a barrier. Inconvenience. Obviously, any of you that have flown on an airplane and since 2001 realize that there's some new things we have to do based on a threat, that causes a little bit of inconvenience. You think about trying to gain access to a facility that maybe has access control. It can provide some, it's not necessarily the most convenient way to access a building is to go through a buzzer system. Aesthetics. Many times when security is done, kind of improperly, it can be aesthetically unpleasing. And many times if we go to a building that has security and we see the security, it actually makes us feel less safe because we wonder, why does this facility have these features in place? But the largest and the most overwhelming is belief. I mean, it's the one that can rarely be overcome because emergencies always happen to other people. So we truly don't believe that they will happen to us, and therefore we don't take any relevant steps to prepare, or we take superficial steps, or we don't really follow a process. And we'll talk a little bit, I think, soon about the process. Instead of actually taking a systematic approach, we kind of just throw features in place or do things to make us feel like we're preparing, when in reality we're probably not doing much of anything in terms of real preparation.
Well, I will say the aesthetics of that cartoon would scare me if I got in that line and saw that moving along in front of me. But so with all that said, when do we really want to prepare?
We think about, if you think about any place that's experienced an incident, they'll do their most preparation immediately following the incident, which doesn't make much sense logically because they've already experienced the problem. But why do they do that? Because now they believe. And they only believe because they've had it happen to them. So we want security when we feel threatened. Coming from my background at the Secret Service, I can remember taking overseas trips with the president. Excuse me, you hear in the background.
Yeah, it's good to have real world reality in our webinar event, so that's okay.
Yeah, I'm in a school, doing it. So I remember staying in overseas, and I remember the hotel that I was at was in a pretty dangerous country, and they had a tank out front. And I remember feeling glad that that tank was there. Now, if I would just show up at Disneyland and there was a tank out front of my hotel, I probably would feel far differently. And why is that? Well, it's because I don't feel threatened at Disneyland. I don't feel threatened, so I don't want the level of security. So we think about, we want it when we want it, and we don't want it when we don't want it. Unfortunately, because emergencies don't schedule themselves, we don't know when the right time is to take action. So the best methodology is to really have a systematic approach that, instead of having an overreaction, has a consistent, slow build of preparation.
So it sounds like there's a balance that you're trying to find.
Absolutely. I mean, everything in life is cost benefit. We always weigh the cost versus the benefits, and really finding that balance of saying, okay, when is it appropriate? What are appropriate features to have in place in a school versus an office building? And we want to layer security in with our operations, not the other way around, which means we certainly can't make schools that nobody can access. We can't make office buildings that nobody can access, but we can take relevant steps around our risks and put responsible features in place and do it in a way that doesn't cause a affect our operations, but actually improves our overall preparation.
So in looking at that, I know that you've created a process looking at site assessments, emergency preparedness plan, and critical incident response training. And we'll talk about those, but when you're going in and doing a site assessment, talk a little bit about what that type of a security site assessment would entail and what you've seen.
Sure. So, you know, some of you may have had a site assessment done, so I'm going to kind of delineate the difference between what we do and what's mostly done. We treat a site assessment as a 360-degree review of an organization, not only physical security, but also, you know, protocols, policies, and procedures, and operations. So the idea behind a site assessment is you're going to take an organization as they are and figure out where the gaps, weaknesses, risks lie in their program. So we look at not only physical security, but we also look at how does the procedures that you have match the physical security that you have in place. And I'll give you a great example. I was in a school not too long ago reviewing their facility, and I noticed they had a lockdown plan. And as I looked at the actual facility, I noticed one major thing that was missing from their doors, and that was locks. And I remember asking them, how do you have a lockdown plan, but you don't have any locks? And they really didn't have a good answer. And the reason was because they'd never actually matched up their site with their protocols. So everything we do starts with a site assessment. And what we try to do is find solutions for an organization where they live, where they are. In other words, we don't come in and say, okay, well, you need $700,000 in new equipment. We try to base the solutions on what they're able and willing to do. You know, and some of those solutions can be as simple as adjustments in policies or, you know, little fine tuning. But our assessments are extremely granular. We really get into the details of every particular feature, policy, and make sure that we're asking a lot of detailed questions, because really your weaknesses lie in the details. They don't lie on the check sheet. So that's always the first step. The next step would be looking at your protocols, and really your site assessment, your site, your features, your operations, they really guide your protocols. So, you know, you can't develop protocols based on what you don't have. You have to base them on what you do have and what's possible. So, and we try to make easy, simple to follow protocols and help organizations really have protocols that are far easier to follow. Nobody in an emergency grabs a book and reads it. You respond with what you already know. So the idea that during an emergency somebody's going to pick up a book and start flipping through it is not realistic. So we try to develop simple, easy to follow emergency preparedness plans that people can actually use. And then all of this is really pulled together by training. In emergencies, human beings don't rise to the occasion. They sink to the level of their training. So we focus really heavily on ensuring that staff, employees receive training on not only the protocols, but actually how to respond. And we try to train every person at an organization. I think it's strange sometimes when I hear, well, we're just going to train our HR person. As if, you know, is everybody supposed to find the HR person and follow them in an emergency? Or do we not value everybody enough to say, you know what, we want to take a couple hours once a year to train everybody on how to respond? Because what we've found with training is not only does it benefit the organization within, but it also provides a level of expertise for employees when they're out with their families or when they're out in general population. So training is the most critical element of that program.
Jason, your approach to training is completely different than what anybody else has heard of that's on the call today. And you use cameras and talk about what those are and talk about the first scenario and how that comes together and the real learning aspect, because I think that everybody will be excited and say, that's exactly the kind of thing we need to have. So can you step through that training?
Sure. So our critical incident response training is is a little bit of active shooter, but we also broaden the aperture a little bit and try to talk more about, response to a variety of emergencies. Some of the different things that first of all, we will never train a place unless we've assessed their facility, which means it is irresponsible for me to go into a facility and train them if I've never looked at their site, because how do I know how to tell them what to do if I've never been in their facility? So every training we do starts with a site assessment. We use some advanced, we actually do 2 active shooter scenarios during our training if the client wants it. We don't use what I would deem to be aggressive or methodology that's a little bit too scary. One of the things that I see with active shooter trainings many times is they essentially take a law enforcement training and try to cram it into a non-law enforcement environment. And I think many times that tends to backfire because people get too scared. So we try to really train people at their level, depending on what kind of organization we're working with. So we do 2 scenarios. We do a pre-test scenario that really is to kind of demonstrate your current level of operation, because what we can do with our training is take you from wherever you're at. So when we do a scenario at the end, you realize that you really have learned quite a bit in just a 3-hour session. We GoPro our scenarios, so we can provide actual real-time feedback. We can show people what happened. They can see it. They can hear it. And it's invaluable in terms of actually people being able to see the training or see the scenarios firsthand and really provide them some instant feedback. And we try to keep the training as light as possible while still getting some very real and serious concepts across. And I can tell you we've trained thousands and thousands of teachers, employees from every different category, and we haven't had a single person who hasn't absolutely loved the training, just because we try to meet them where they are. And I think that's important when it comes to training.
Well, showing them where they are today, what's not working, and then doing the training, and then they can see how they improve. That's an exciting concept. And with the cameras, it's not you telling them; they're doing it. And I think that anytime that someone learns through self-discovery, they see it, they get it. Now that's been ingrained in them. So the innovative way that you've done that makes a remarkable difference. And I know we're going to have a lot of questions today from folks, and we'll try to reach out to everyone after the webinar just to answer those and do this. But I've seen Jason and his team make a tremendous difference in organizations as a result of that. Now, as you're doing the training, and I know you do more than active shooter, you've got a different set of words that you use when you talk about the response. And we've all heard run, hide, fight, and I want to contrast that with your evacuate, secure, and confront. But why don't you talk about it first, and then I've got an observation I'd like to share. So, Jason, back to you.
Sure. So we, obviously there's a lot of different methodologies in terms of active shooter, but really they're all fairly similar in terms of the response. You really only have 3 options in an active shooter situation. You can either get out, which is evacuate. You can try to be safe within your facility, which we call secure, and I'll tell you why we don't call it hide. Or you can confront, or you can, which is the fight and the run, hide, fight. The problem that we found is without training, people tend to pursue their favorite option as opposed to the option that may be the best given the scenario they're faced with. So the big thing that we try to train people to understand is, even though the 3 options are universal and there really is only 3, you have to understand the concepts of these and how they apply so that you can pick the one that best fits the situation you're faced with. So, for example, what you see many times in scenarios is people are very apprehensive to confront just because it doesn't come natural, and also they're scared. So what they'll do is they'll be in a situation where they probably should confront, but instead they'll choose another option. And what we try to do in our training is really drive home the concept so that they understand, hey, I have to choose the best option given the situation that I'm faced with. Now, we choose the term secure instead of hide, and the reason we choose that term is because I think the connotation behind hide doesn't really match what I want people to do. What I really want people to do is not simply hide underneath a desk or underneath a table. I want them to actually find some cover or concealment, or I want them to be in a place that actually provides them some protection. And the connotation behind hide is simply, I hide behind a curtain or I get under a desk. And if you think about the game hide and seek, what happens at the end of the game of hide and seek is you get found. Well, and I think when people think of hide, I've noticed that they simply, they'll get under a desk or hide under a table when that really doesn't provide them much in terms of protection. And evacuate obviously is our term for simply leaving the area. So we use the term, and we ordered this really in a different order based on the client. Evacuate, secure, confront is our methodology.
And everybody should be thinking about the difference here is more than just semantics. It's an empowering one. If I said the word flee, you flee in terror. If you run, where do you run? How do you do that? And if you're having to run and you're not in control, evacuate is a controlled process. The example with the percentages and the use, Jason had pointed out about the success in fire, and think about how that's worked for over 65 years. No child died in a school fire. Evacuate puts the control there. Hide, it's not hide and go seek. It's not hide in pulling the covers up so the bed bugs won't bite. It's secure. We're going to put this into place, so he's empowering your people, the people that are there, to be able to handle those elements. And confront, we're not going to fight, but we're going to confront them. And so positioning this differently, and then with that change in the training that we're talking about, that is very experiential, very much a learned behavior, and you start to see those differences, it is very powerful. The reality on a regular basis is obviously as you have turnover and grow and change. So this isn't we did training 3 years ago and we don't need to do it. This needs to be instilled and as part of your culture, just as anything else from that standpoint would be. Jason, are you still with me?
I am. I don't have the presentation up anymore, but can you still hear me on the phone?
I can. When I saw your name drop off over there, I thought, uh-oh, but as long as you're here. So I think that the creative approach, based upon the fundamentals that you led at the Secret Service and the experiences that your team have had, provides an empowerment to a school that they can't get anywhere else. And so that's an important element. I'll share a little more about the behavioral risk threat assessment that we're working now in supporting schools with, and it's the ability to identify that person, that student, who is domestic violence in the home, the cutting, the cyberbullying or the physical bullying that's occurring, those behaviors, to intervene long before it poses a threat to themselves or others. We're seeing that make a real difference. There's a new online training program that the University of Alabama has developed to support that for your threat management team and making a difference. So we don't want to minimize that physical security is the only answer. It's a key part of the answer. But if we can intervene back as these behaviors first started, it'll make a real difference in the terms of the total outcomes. Now, after today's meeting, there will be a brief available summarizing the comments that Jason has shared, and we did an earlier version today with Mark associated with it. The Firestorm website, you go to firestorm.com/briefs, and then you can download the paper from today's session. You can also watch the recording of what we've talked about today and share that with others within your school so that they can see those elements associated with it. I wanted to thank RenWeb for their sponsoring of this program and continuing education, and there's been a webinar a month now for 4 or 5 years, all there that you can go back and watch and learn to build a comprehensive training program around it. So Jason, we've talked about a lot of stuff today around these various elements. What's the final types of thoughts and messages you want to leave with the people that are watching today?
Well, the good news is whenever you have a webinar like this, you quickly realize that the people that have no interest in trying to figure out a way to make their organization better, they're not sitting on the phone right now. Because when you go back to that concept of belief, they just don't believe that this is an issue for them, so they won't take any steps. The first step that you can take is saying, hey, we're going to address this issue. We're not going to let it control our lives. We're not our culture, but we are going to address it, but we're going to do it in a responsible, systematic way. You know, and working with schools and seeing the struggles that they go through, working with businesses and seeing how they're trying to address these problems, the biggest issue is process. There's really never been a comprehensive process involved. It's always been, hey, we're scared, we better do this. And unfortunately, many times when we react out of fear as opposed to out of, knowledge, we react inappropriately. We spend money that we don't need to spend. We put features in that don't really help us solve the problem, and we never really address the underlying issues. When you can get involved from an early, when you take a process approach and you say, look, we're not going to go crazy. We're going to take this slow and make sure we're doing things in appropriate fashion. We're going to make sure that we use our budget to the best of our ability. We're going to make sure we take relevant steps in every area. That includes physical security. It includes prevention through programs like BRTHA, which is that behavioral risk threat assessment, which really does work, really does provide us with probably the only true prevention opportunity there is. If we don't take advantage of that, we're doing ourselves and our organizations a disservice. So following that site assessment, really looking at our protocols, and asking for help. We're not all, I'm not an expert in much, but I am an expert in security. So I understand the process, and I'm always encouraged when somebody will ask for help and say, you know what, we don't know how to solve this problem. We need help. And that's really what organizations like Firestorm and like SecureEd, that's what we're here to do, is provide that expertise and hopefully, and really have an ongoing relationship so that you have a reservoir of knowledge and expertise that you can go back to and ask for help when it comes to, solving these problems. So if I can encourage you to do one thing, it would be think of the process and determine that you're going to follow that process. And it's not that difficult, but it does take a little bit of an investment on the front end.
And it's not an overwhelming investment, and obviously it's a function of the size of the facility. Is it a campus? Is it a single building? Is it multiple schools? And it can be worked. And I know that budget has not kept anyone from being able to do that. The Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program, because of your attendance in the webinar today and the affiliation with RenWeb, there's a special pricing that makes it affordable for you today. And again, we don't have to say put one child, whether it's from the assessment or the training or the Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment Program, to make a significant difference. Jason, thanks for your service to your country in the Secret Service and all the people that you've saved there. I think, though, that the real safety that you're bringing to the country now and the lives of people is the work that you're doing in schools every single day. And thank you for that and the calling that you have and the organization that you built. Thanks to everyone on the phone today for your career and what you're doing in our schools every day to empower our students to grow and to give them the safety of an environment to do that in. If you would like more information, you can go to Firestorm.com. You can download the brief and watch webinars and get access to more information. If you've got a question you would like to have an answer to, you can send that to us at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can pick up the phone and call us at 800-321-2219. I think that no one goes into the field of education at any level unless they really want to make a difference in the lives of those that they touch. One of the things that I think has been the calling that I've seen from Jason and the work that his teams do is they want to make sure those lives are protected while they're in your care, custody, and control. We live in a world of increasing violence. I've spoken to a lot of audiences this year, and we've done multiple surveys, and if I were to ask you, do you think violence in America is increasing or decreasing, I know the answer is going to be increasing. You make a difference. This makes a difference. It's the number one concern of parents. Concern that when they send their child to school today, that they come home in the same condition that they arrived in your care. Knowing what the weaknesses and strengths are of your facility, the strengths and weaknesses of your plans, and the strength and weaknesses of the training and understanding of your people, those are all fundamental prerequisites in order to make sure that those things have done. There are a lot of people committed to making that happen. We stand there to help you in those commitments. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here and listen and watch and look for the brief and look for the recording. Jason, thank you for rushing through to be able to join us here, and it was great to hear the paging in the school in the background. And I guess even schools in Vegas have to be protected and secured there. So make sure you make it home safely, and make sure that you make it home with all your money and don't leave it in Vegas at this point. Any last words before we end our webinar today?
No, I want to thank everybody once again. I know that you know, you got a lot going on when you're in the middle of getting ready to start a school year, and hopefully if we can make safety and preparation a little bit of piece of that, and we're happy to help with that. And I wish you all the best of school years. And yeah, like you said, we're out here in Las Vegas. We just finished one training, and they're definitely feeling pretty confident right now. So I appreciate your time, and I wish you all luck.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day and a wonderful school year. There'll be another webinar next month, and look forward to speaking with you then. Thanks, and have a good day. Goodbye.